Bring on round two. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Motley Show, where we look at one of the bigger stories in politics and news each week, try to step outside the echo chamber and find out what's really going on. Now, of course, the biggest story politically this week is the second GOP debate that happened on CNN on Wednesday night. Just like the previous debate on Fox, there were too many people to fit on one stage, so they split it into two debates. This time, 4 people on the early stage and 11 people in the primetime slot. Now, going into this debate, there were a lot of little stories, a lot of little plot lines going on, but one of the biggest ones was the fact that the rules of the debate, the rules that picked who got into the big debate, were changed very close to the time the debate actually happened, and the only person that affected was Carly Fiorina. She got moved from the earlier debate to the primetime debate, and she's the only one that actually saw that shift. So there's some people talking about whether or not it was from the fact that Carly Fiorina's campaign put pressure on CNN about how they were structuring those rules, and they bent just for her. Even after the fact that they had said legally they cannot change the rules, and they'd said that for weeks and weeks before this happened. But whatever the case may be, she ended up in the primetime debate, and it ended well for her. But we'll get into that later. So let's talk about the early debate first. There were only 4 people in that debate. Governor Bobby Jindal of Louisiana, former Senator Rick Santorum from Pennsylvania, senior senator from South Carolina, Lindsey Graham, and former governor of New York, George Pataki. Now, the first thing that I noticed that was a little weird was it seemed to be that the people who were on stage at that moment were set up by height, going from Governor Pataki, who was the tallest, all the way down to Bobby Jindal, who was the shortest. But who knows? Most of the time, the position is actually set up by who's polling the best. And honestly, when we're talking about whose performance did well or didn't do well, this is only my personal opinion. And from the early debate, I would say that Santorum and Pataki really just kind of disappeared. There wasn't anything memorable from either of those men. They kind of stuck to what they were known for, and obviously that hasn't done anything previously for them, so it's not doing anything for them now. The 2 people that changed up their tack a little bit and actually got a little bit more vocal were Senator Lindsey Graham and Governor Bobby Jindal. Now, Bobby Jindal going into this debate had actually been very openly attacking Donald Trump because basically he sees that Donald Trump is the leader and he feels that he can get some of that press attention by openly attacking him as viciously and as strongly as Trump seems to be attacking everybody else. Now, let's not forget that Bobby Jindal is a Rhodes Scholar. This is not a stupid man, but let's see if this tact actually does any good for him. He definitely showed up in the debate as being a very strong contender and very strong in his beliefs, and pointing out very often that Donald Trump really isn't a conservative and actually really isn't anything except for someone who cares about Donald Trump. But that might be too little too late for Bobby Jindal to actually break himself into the big pack. Now, surprisingly, the person who seemed to get the most coverage from the early debate was Senator Lindsey Graham, and not really for any huge policy positions he took. In actuality, one of the weird things about Lindsey Graham was no matter what question you asked him, he answered with a foreign policy answer. Everything came back to the fact that we are going to be attacked by radical Islam. And the fact that Lindsey Graham is the only person who's willing to put boots on the ground. He will send 10,000 troops to Iran on day 1. So if you're a voter out there and you're looking for someone who's really hawkish on war and ready to start a war with Iran, this is the guy to do it. But oddly enough, it wasn't exactly the foreign policy answers that got him the most press coverage. It was the fact that he was human. The fact that he made jokes throughout the entire debate. Jokes about himself as well as about the situation in general. He came off very folksy, so we'll see if this actually carries over into the next debate whenever that exactly happens. But I predict that some of these 4, I'm not saying how many, but some of them probably will drop out before the next big debate. Now on to the big show. And not this big show. I don't have the rights to talk about that guy. Now, obviously we know that Trump was the biggest name on the stage that night, but here's a quick rundown of the total attendance of people on stage. Donald Trump, Jeb Bush, Carly Fiorina, Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, John Kasich, Mike Huckabee, Scott Walker, Rand Paul, and Chris Christie. Let's start with Chris Christie. Now, Chris Christie for a long time has been the person who's been the most brash, but of course Donald Trump has completely stolen that title from him now. So Christie's doing a little something different. He came up on the stage not talking about himself, and in fact tried very much to pivot away from himself, saying, this is not my presidency. This is our presidency. This is about you. This is about the voters. Which to some people might say, look, he's trying to look at the substance of what it is to be president. It's not about you. It's about the country. But while that's a very lofty ideal, I don't know if that's going to resonate loudly enough with the voters who are really going after personality right now, at least at this point in the debate. Now, obviously, Chris Christie talked a lot about his time in New Jersey and the fact that he's vetoed over 400 bills and kept them that way. Nobody overrode any of his vetoes. He also said that he defunded Planned Parenthood, which a lot of people on stage talked about, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But at one point during a little bit of a sparring match between Carly Fiorina and Donald Trump about how much money they made and how successful they are, Christie stepped in and said, look, you're both successful people. Congratulations. I'm here for our people. I'm here for the people of the United States. Again, trying to take everything away from successful people and bringing it back to someone who will get the job done. Now, he might have stepped a little bit too far when he started dragging Hillary Clinton into things and talking about the email scandal in Benghazi and saying, who will prosecute Hillary Clinton? I will. But at this point, there's nothing to prosecute. There's no crime that's actually been found. And when later on he said you have to intervene before the crime happens, that quote's a little bit scary because, you're going into Minority Report things, and I don't think he has somebody sitting in a tank back in his office telling him how things are going to go. And he did have an interesting idea about keeping Social Security solvent, which he said is going to be bankrupt in 7 to 8 years, but other people are saying I'm not sure exactly where he got that number from. Christie's idea is stop paying Social Security to people who make a certain amount of money who don't need it. He pointed directly at Donald Trump, and Trump said, yeah, sure, take away my Social Security, that's fine, I'll sign 100% of it away. But that's only one person. And really, if you're taking Social Security away from that 1% of people who make that money, that's not going to keep Social Security solvent. Not for very long. It's a good soundbite, but not a real solution. Now let's move on to Rand Paul. During the debate, everybody was talking about Trump at some point. In fact, the first 5 questions were all about Trump and things that he said and how it affected other people. But Trump himself brought Rand Paul into the picture at the moment that Trump first got the mic by saying, hi, I'm glad to be here. And you know what? Rand Paul shouldn't be here. He's not even polling above 1%. Why is he here? He's a waste of our time. But Rand Paul kept his cool. And in fact, he was ready for Trump's attack and responded by calling it sophomoric, which it was. One of his continuing talking points was the fact that everyone wants to go ahead and start wars with either Russia or Iran. And he's saying, you know what, we have to negotiate, even though some of the GOP and some of the conservative circles don't want to hear things like that. They think diplomacy is over. We need to show strength through defense and offense. But Paul makes the case that most of the time, these interventions in other countries don't actually work out well in the end. We might topple one dictator, but it gets replaced by somebody far worse. He talks about the vacuums that are created and what happens when other people come in to fill those vacuums. He's also the only person on stage that talked about minorities, other than, say, Latinos because of the immigration debate. Paul actually was talking about inner cities. He was talking about black people, and he's the only one that said anything about black people and the minorities and their experience right now. He mentioned that the war on drugs has had an incredibly racial outcome because he says it should be up to the states on whether or not they want to legalize marijuana. Or Carly Fiorina brought up the fact that her son died of an overdose, but didn't say from what, and I doubt he died from a marijuana overdose. And Chris Christie also said that he would enforce all federal laws, which Paul kept going back to as well about saying, fine, you're going to enforce federal law. That means you're going to go to a mother who's giving cannabis oil to her 9-year-old son who has seizures. You're going to go arrest that woman and rip her child away from her, which of course is a terrible story, but that's not what people are saying. If that's medical marijuana, he's saying that's legal. But Paul wanted the story in there and he got it. Also, as many people love to point out, Paul is a doctor, but he's not a general practitioner. He's an ophthalmologist. He's an eye doctor. But still, people look to him for medical advice or medical reasoning. And when the vaccine discussion came up, which we'll get into a little bit later, he said, look, I think vaccines are amazing. They're one of the best inventions that have ever happened to humankind. He thinks a parent should have an option to spread out the vaccination schedule so that their kids are supposedly a little bit safer from over-vaccinating all at once. And in fact, other medical professionals say that spreading out the calendar actually just opens up the window for other diseases to come in, preventable ones. Now let's move over to Scott Walker. Scott Walker, not a whole lot to say except for the fact that he kept saying, look, I've taken on a whole bunch of people and won. He took on the unions in his state and he won. He took on the recall effort and he won. He just basically likes to say the fact that they've come at me and I'm still standing here. So I'll be the one who can take on the Democratic Party as a whole. But in terms of pure policy, he doesn't really have a lot of things different to say than anyone else. Just like in the earlier debate with Lindsey Graham, Scott Walker says he would send troops back to Iraq. But one of the things he was a little bit fact-checked on was he said he would use the 3,000 troops that are already there to do some of that work. But in fact, out of those 3,000 troops, almost none of them are combat personnel. They're trainers and advisors. So that ain't gonna work. That's not gonna do a lot of damage to ISIS. One point that I will give to Walker is that Trump called him out later on in the debate saying that he had a $2.2 billion shortfall in his budget and how could he be trusted with the country's budget? But Trump was wrong about that. The $2.2 billion that he's talking about was a projected shortfall before the budget was actually reconciled. In Wisconsin, there's a constitutional amendment in their state constitution that the governor has to balance the budget before it can be passed. So of course, Walker did that. Now, a lot of people yelled at Walker for the way that he did that, the fact that he cut a lot of money out of education and he did all these other things, but he did get a balanced budget. Moving on to Huckabee. This hasn't been the way that Huckabee has always done this, but this time he came out kind of like the jolly old Santa Claus of the GOP. He didn't want to fight with anyone. He opened up a statement by basically saying, Trump's a great guy, I'm so glad you're here. I'm not here to fight with anybody. Let's talk about Kim Davis. Now famously, he went down to Kentucky to take care of this clerk who wouldn't issue same-sex marriage licenses and made it his personal mission. But as of this point, that mission has basically failed, and it's also failed to really generate a lot of stuff for him. Talking about same-sex marriage, he said that the Supreme Court actually created the law allowing same-sex couples to marry, but really, they didn't. They just interpreted the Constitution in a way that said that it was equal because these people are equal citizens and they deserve equal rights. They didn't create a new law for them, they just allowed them into the same laws that we already have. In some places, what he's referring to, though, is the fact that the Supreme Court overruled all the state courts, maybe creating laws in those states, but he didn't exactly specify that. He also wants to get rid of all taxes and basically get rid of the IRS. Says no more taxes on anything that you produce, it's only taxes on what you consume. So if you buy something, you're taxed on it, but you're not taxed on your income, no matter how you get that income. It might sound interesting, but many economists don't think that would ever fly. Moving on to Ohio Governor John Kasich. The fact that this was taking place in the Reagan Library in Simi Valley, California, Kasich in his opening statement was the first one to drop a Reagan soundbite by saying he wants to bring back the shining city on the hill, which was a famous speech that Reagan gave, and allowing himself to classify himself as the Reaganite on stage. But when challenged by radio host Hugh Hewitt about why he said nice things about Hillary Clinton in the past and why he won't openly attack her now, he basically said what was a very honest statement. A lot of people don't know who I am right now. I'm the governor of Ohio, but many people haven't heard of me, so I'm not going to spend my time attacking her. She's famous enough and she'll get hers when I get into the general election. It was actually a very reasoned answer and one of the best actually that I heard him give all night. On top of another thing that he kept mentioning was that we can't go into wars around the world all by ourselves. We can't keep taking on dictators like Bashar al-Assad or Vladimir Putin and expect everyone to just sit by and watch us do it on our own. If we really want to win, we want to beat evil, we need to have allies. And Kasich mentioned this over and over again that we need those allies, that we are stronger as a group and not when we fight as an individual. Will the debate really help him get noticed? I don't know. He said some good things, but he kind of played it even keel. We'll see how long he stays in. But let's not forget about the fact that he is the governor of Ohio, which is the most important swing state in the country. Many political pundits have said for years, no candidate gets to the White House without going through Ohio. Now, Marco Rubio. He tried hard in his opening statement to seem likable and made a joke about his infamous water drink during his State of the Union response, but it fell very flat. It was a really bad joke and nobody laughed. There was no applause after his intro. There was nothing. So he started back on his heels, but he picked himself up nice throughout the rest of the debate. He stood strong, he stood firm on what he was saying, and he delivered it with poise. Now, what he delivered may not have been actual facts, but he delivered it well, and at least at this point in the debate, it's a lot about presentation, not about substance. He had pretty much canned answers for almost every question, and he delivered those well, but then of course he did come across a few things that sounded a little bit off. At one point, when talking about whether or not to go into full-fledged war or send 10,000 troops rather than sending small forces to do little things here or there, he said that the US military is not designed for pinprick operations. Many people found that to be really not true. Let's not even mention the Bin Laden raid. That's a pinprick operation. The US military is at its best when it can flex, when it can go from a pinprick to a tidal wave with just an order. Now, of course, one of the other things that he said that many people are pouncing on is when he said that America is not a planet. Now, that might sound really dumb on its own, but that's not what he was trying to say, and it was taken out of context, so I'm going to give him a slide on that one. What he meant was America doing its own thing on climate change and basically making all these changes, making us more carbon neutral and doing solar and doing all these things to help the environment isn't going to really have a huge effect on the planet if we're the only ones doing it. We need the rest of the world to do it too, but his way of looking at it was to say, why bother? If the rest of the world isn't going to do it, why should we? But he's ignoring the fact that America is supposed to be known for its leadership. And if America doesn't get involved in climate change legislation, if they don't take some of these steps, the rest of the world is not going to follow suit. They want us to go first. Because if we don't, again, it's not going to matter if other people do it. Because we may not be the biggest one, but we are one of the biggest polluters. Moving on. Ted Cruz. One of the first things I noticed about Ted Cruz was during the opening statement run, everyone was giving their little piece, they were getting a little applause, and it moved on. Nobody applauded for Ted Cruz. I'm not sure if they didn't know when he ended and it was just moving on, or if nobody liked what he said. But either way, it was kind of awkwardly quiet. Now let's remember that Ted Cruz has a huge history in debate. This is his ground. This is what he likes to do, and you can see how well prepared he is for it. He stares down the camera instead of actually talking to anyone else on the stage because he knows he's trying to engage with the viewer, with the voter. He also has a particular cadence to his voice, which is the way that he tries to direct everything. But it also lacks passion. It seems manufactured. And in many of the places where he was talking, it just was flat out wrong. He's a huge opponent of the Iran deal, and that's nothing new for the GOP. But he said, if we do this, if we go through with the Iran deal, the US will become the largest financier of terrorism. He also said that the Iran deal was actually going to accelerate Iran getting a nuclear bomb, which is inherently inaccurate. That's exactly the opposite of what the whole deal is supposed to be about. If the deal goes through, and it looks like it will actually hold Iran from getting the bomb at least for 10 years, if not longer. Now for him, one of the proudest moments he had on stage was when he was talking about the fact that he had been endorsed by the gun owners of America, and how it showed how much he stood for the Second Amendment. But Cruz left out the fact that yes, he was endorsed by them, but he was also the only person, the only candidate to actually fill out and send back their questionnaire, which kind of makes him the default winner. Dr. Ben Carson. As soft-spoken as ever, he tried to show off some of his actual knowledge of foreign policy that he's been boning up on since the last debate. Everyone knows that he's never held political office before, and some people say that's great because he's uncorrupted by the system, but other people point out the fact that he hasn't been in politics at all. We can actually verify any of his experience or the fact that he knows anything about foreign policy, about the way the world works, or anything outside of being a pediatric neurosurgeon, which that dude has down pat. And I will give him credit for the fact that he cannot be shaken. He will never get angry. He will never get aggressive. That's his shtick right now, and it's working for him. He is gaining in the polls. He's actually tied Trump in the margin of error in some places, and in others, he is there. He refused throughout the debate to take Trump on head-to-head in the style of braggadocio that Trump is used to, but he also failed a little bit when he was starting to talk about the details of his particular policies, because it's a little new to him. I also personally found his immigration plan a little weird because he said one of the things he would do with illegal immigrants that are already in the country, he would get those illegal immigrants to come out of the shadows, he would get them verified, he would get them in the system, and he would get them certain types of work visas or work permits, but they wouldn't become citizens. And he said he would get them to go to work because he would have them doing the jobs that Americans don't seem to want to do in the agricultural industry, which basically he means food pickers. Which, strangely enough, that's what so many of them are doing right now. So I don't know exactly why they would come out of the shadows and introduce themselves to you as being an illegal immigrant, only to have you send him back to do the same job he's already doing. I did like what he had to say about certain foreign policy aspects, about saying that there are smart ways to do things and then there are muscular ways to do things. And you should always try the smart one first. Which again, kind of is exactly what Obama's doing now. Lastly, I'll bring up the vaccine thing now because we are talking about an actual doctor here. And he said, yes, vaccines are a good thing, they are necessary, and there has been no study, I repeat, no study, that shows a link between vaccines and autism. And he had to say this because Trump decided to go all full birther on this situation and say that he knew somebody, he had somebody who came to him with this beautiful, beautiful 2.5-year-old boy who then went and got all of his vaccinations, and oh my God, he got really sick and got autism right after that. And of course, everyone points out the fact, like Carson did, that there is no studies linking autism to vaccines. So it was good to have an actual doctor on stage, not just an eye doctor, but somebody who would know about this, someone who's in pediatric medicine, who actually ran a pediatric hospital. But again, Trump just kind of stood there like, well, you have your opinion, I have mine. And here comes Carly Fiorina. Now, many people are saying Carly Fiorina was the big winner of the night. She's already the big winner no matter what people say because she got on to the primetime debate. She got out of the losers table and into the big time. She got herself noticed by far more people than she did in the previous debate. My personal opinion is her best moment is her retaliation very calmly and very civilly on Donald Trump's remark about her looks. When he said in an interview, look at her, tell me that that's someone you would vote for. Basically saying she's unattractive and why would anyone vote for that person? Now later on, Trump tried to clarify this by saying it's about her persona, but it was obvious what he was talking about. And by the point in the debate that this actually came up and Jake Tapper, the moderator, actually went after Fiorina and said, what do you think about this? Trump had just gotten finished getting into a tit for tat with Jeb Bush about something that he said. And he said, this is what you said. This is what you said. I'm just saying what you said and everyone heard what you said. So Carly very deftly turned that around on him and said, women heard very clearly what you said. And then she just stepped back from the mic. In fact, she might as well just grab the mic and dropped it on the floor and walked out because she won that moment. She's the first person throughout all the GOP that's actually knocked Trump back on his heels. Trump tried to jump to the microphone during the applause and say that he thinks she's a very attractive woman and that she's very smart, but no one was buying it. He was obviously taken down. In the area of foreign policy, she threw out a lot of very specific details, and it shows that she's been boning up on this. But some people are still talking about those details being not quite accurate, but then as being the only woman on the stage when the Planned Parenthood debate came up, it was really her thing to grab hold of. She's the only mother on that stage. She's the only one who can have an abortion and has an opinion on female reproductive rights that comes from that place. but she's also stridently pro-life, and she came out against Planned Parenthood, saying we should defund them, and she was very specific about why. She talked about those sting videos. She talked about the video where you could see a baby's heart still beating as they had to pull it out of the mother while it was alive, keep it that way so that they could harvest its brain. Now that sounds awful. That is horrible and not true. Even people on Bill O'Reilly the very next day came on and said, well, let's not get carried away with ourselves. The actual footage that she's talking about never happened in a Planned Parenthood clinic. What she's talking about was described by someone who used to work for an affiliate who got fetal tissue from an affiliate of Planned Parenthood. And then in the video, the footage that is shown during that conversation is actually stock footage from a company that shows abortions. When challenged on this the very next morning by George Stephanopoulos on Good Morning America, Fiorina wouldn't back down. She's trying to make this more wide and say everyone should be horrified about abortion in general, but she's not going to get away from the fact that she made a very specific comment during this debate, and she's going to be challenged on the fact that that comment is demonstrably not true. But going back to her performance overall, she was very strong, and at this point in the debate, like I said, this is a lot about performance, less about substance. She performed well. And a lot of people are saying she won. Now the last two people, the two big heavyweights, Jeb Bush versus Donald Trump. Now Bush showed up a lot stronger than he has before. He was more aggressive and he went after Trump in some good ways. And the biggest of those was when he was talking about Trump yelling at him for speaking Spanish. And he tied that to the fact that his wife, being Mexican born, speaks Spanish. He speaks fluent Spanish at home as well. And he demanded that Trump apologize to his wife, which Trump wouldn't do. And I think that again shows the kind of person that Trump is, and that's exactly what Bush wanted to do. So hey, point Bush. Now when going into Planned Parenthood, he says he's also defunded Planned Parenthood in his state, and he says the best way to do it is not the way that they're trying to do it now, and definitely not shut down the government. He says go after the Title 10 funding. You know, make a carve out in the Title 10 so that Planned Parenthood just can't use it anymore. That's the way to do it. Oh, and he also got into a really big tit for tat with Trump about the fact that Trump once tried to buy Bush's support in Florida so that he could open casinos. And he said, I'm the only one on stage that Trump has come to and tried to buy, and I said no. So I've got principles. Trump said, look, if I wanted it, I would have got it. And they fought over this. But again, Trump's wrong. He hosted a fundraiser for Jeb Bush back in 1997, and they gave the Republican Party in Florida $50,000 in 1998. This was exactly the time that he was trying to break into Florida to build casinos. Now, there's no proof of a specific quid pro quo there, but it's obvious what was going on. Once Bush told Trump that he was never going to put gambling in Florida, Trump left. So lastly, the big man on the table, the guy in the center of it all, Donald Trump. Per his usual demeanor, in the first 2 seconds, he plugged his own book and then proceeded to immediately get booed for calling out Rand Paul for saying that he's polling too low. As I mentioned before, not a good opener. All in all, the entire debate for him really wasn't that good. He never seemed to get his ground. Everything that he was saying was being contradicted by other people, and he was saying certain things that were just flat out wrong. When he talks about the 14th Amendment, when he says that there's no other country in the world that has birthright citizenship, as if he's studied this. Well, if he had studied it, he would know that there are at least 30 countries in the world that have birthright citizenship, including Canada and Mexico, which he continuously referred to as not having that. He continued to say that no one would have been talking about immigration without him, but Carly Fiorina actually brought up the fact that we've been talking about immigration for years. Just a few years ago, there was the Gang of 8 immigration bill, and we all fought over that. It's been a subject. It was a subject before him, it'll be a subject after him. And when challenged on his immigration position, basically saying that he's going to deport all 11 million people and then let back in the good ones, he fails to actually say how he's going to pay for that. We're talking thousands and thousands of people a day would have to be deported, and that would have to go on for at least 2 years to get to 11 million people. He has no idea how he would pay for that. And even Chris Christie brought up the fact that there's not enough law enforcement personnel in the entire country to get that kind of thing done. But hey, those are just details, right? And just to tap off his night, when he was saying that you're in our country and you should speak English because you have to be assimilated, Hillary Clinton used this as a perfect moment to troll him on Twitter saying this. Now, I took 3 years of Spanish, but I'm not even going to try to pronounce all that because I'm sure I will do it horrible damage. But I will give you the translation, which is, freedom includes the right to speak in any language. That makes us strong as a country, and it is something that we should celebrate, not denigrate. Can you send an emoji of you dropping the mic? Because that would have worked. So there you go. This was an incredibly long episode of the Motley Stew Show, and if you stayed this long, I love your support. And if you're here, you deserve the question for the week, which is, what did you think of the debate? Who did you think won? Who did you think lost? Who do you think we will never see again in the 2016 race? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks again for watching another episode of the Motley Stew Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can do so here. Then you can keep up on all the other 2016 videos that I'm going to put out during the race. You can also like, favorite, or share this video to anyone else who would like to jump into the discussion. Stay tuned for next week, and as always, here's a little bit of Logan. Hi.
Hello.
Oh, they even changed the font of that, didn't they? Hold on, I gotta plug in. I'm just losing battery here.
I'll be right back.
Okay, let's hope that works.